Hi everyone and welcome to Theme Park Worldwide and the second video in our new for 2021 series, The Future Of. Now this is the series that started last week where I shared my thoughts on the future of Alton Towers. This week I'm back to talk about my favourite park here in the United Kingdom. It is Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Got lots to talk about in this one. It's going to start off just like last week. I'm going to go through my predictions first, the things that I think are likely to happen at Blackpool Pleasure Beach in the future, and then I'll move on to my wish list, the things that I would love to see happen at the park. If I was in charge, these things will be done. So here we go, lots to talk about. Let's get started. Now over the past sort of 10 years, Blackpool Pleasure Beach has gone through a bit of a regeneration. A lot of areas of the park have been refurbished. There's been a lot of sort of grey colour schemes coming around the park, modernisation of general areas. Things that I think about when I talk about this modernisation, as soon as you walk out of the Noah's Ark building at the entrance, all of the fountains that were put in there and all of the landscaping, new signage on rides like the Derby Racer and Steeplechase. Along with that, out the front of Wallace and Gromit, all of the pathways were done. They're the sort of refurbishments and modernisation that I'm talking about, and I'm expecting that to continue at Pleasure Beach over the next few years. Now, as much as a lot of the park is looking really fresh and a lot better than it did maybe 10 years ago, there's still a few areas that really need that uplift and that modernisation, and I'm going to go through those now. So the first one of those is the big dome, pretty much in the middle of the park, opposite Grand Prix and just to the left of Wallace and Gromit Thrill-O-Matic. That actually used to be home to an attraction called Astro Swirl. It was a centrifuge attraction, of course, where you stand up against the walls, it spins round and then lifts up. I remember seeing that as a kid. I don't think I ever went on it, but I remember seeing it from the outside, and it looked quite interesting how it was set up because it was in the dome. It was very different. A centrifuge is more of a classic fairground travelling ride, but it was there at Pleasure Beach, and with it being in the dome, it looked quite impressive from the outside. However, that dome is in a bit of a state now. Up until a couple of years ago, you could actually still walk into the dome and it was an arcade. For last year, 2020, that actually blocked it off so you couldn't go inside. It was in a really poor state in there. I don't know if any of you actually went in there up until a couple of years ago when your last time was to go inside, but I tell you what, it was in a pretty poor state. There was paint flaking off the walls, there was a lot of damp issues, old carpets. It was in a really bad condition in there. To be honest, I'm surprised it even operated as an arcade, but it did do. Luckily, Pleasure Beach have seen sense and actually blocked it off now. There's just signage on the front. However, that is a big potential area and what I think they will do something with in the future, whether that be a new ride, possibly a new flat ride on there, could be a new shop, new restaurant, bar, something like that. But I do think they're going to do something with that site at some point in the future. Now, along with that as well, another big area that really needs an uplift now is FY4, and that is the area all around those dancing fountains. Now, the fountains look fantastic, and of course you've got the big ones turnaround section above there that's pretty iconic and looks amazing. However, that area really needs an uplift. However, I do think that is something what they're going to do over the next few years. 2020, they actually changed the former Wild Mouse site into the hub, which was an entertainment area. Very temporary. They've put a little wooden stage in there, a couple of other little areas, but it's not even got like proper bar or anything there. It's just a couple of tents what they put in. Fair enough, it was done on a budget, mainly for their Oktoberfest event what they did last year. But I can see a lot of that area changing in the next few years. Of course, Trauma Towers, that was also removed along with the Wild Mouse. Trauma Towers have been closed for longer than the Wild Mouse had. I mean, that just went over winter after operating the year before. But Trauma Towers was shut for many years, but they took the whole ride building out and the facade, which looked quite nice actually, but it had to go, which is understandable. It was getting old. It needed either a big refurbishment or demolishing. They decided to demolish it. But it's time for something to be done on that site. So I can see them actually putting in some form of new ride on there maybe in the future. It's a pretty big space. If you combine the Wild Mouse, Trauma Towers and the overall FY4 area, I can see them possibly getting rid of the food outlets opposite, because they're actually only shipping containers. You can't tell from the front, but next time you're on the big one, if you look down, they're actually shipping containers there. So they could easily be moved to another location or just removed entirely. entirely. I can see the fountain staying, but maybe keeping the pathway sort of as it is and having some sort of coaster going around the outside of it maybe at some point in the future. You know, I'm putting it out there now. I don't think we're going to see a new roller coaster at Blackpool Pleasure Beach for quite a few years, unfortunately. There is some in my wish list though that I'll come on to, but being realistic with the current financial situation, I don't think we're going to be seeing a new coaster anytime soon. However, I do think we might see a refurbishment of that area. Possibly a new ride could go in there. But yeah, you know, I can't see it happening in the next few years, a coaster on that site. Possibly a flat ride or maybe something smaller to go on there. Or even just a refurbishment of the area, some new restaurants, permanent buildings, and covering up the back of the Alice show building. Because at the moment, it's just horrible. It's just a corrugated building. Why they haven't just put some signage on the back or something to advertise the Boulevard Hotel or something, I don't know. But yeah, it really needs something doing there. Short term would be put a nice banner on the side of the building and some nice planting around. Long term, I think, you know, a few more permanent buildings around there, or ideally a ride if the budget could stretch to that point. But yeah, it's a pretty big site where they could do something with. Now, along with that, I can also see the removal of an attraction, and that being Impossible. Now, Impossible is a little interactive walkthrough attraction located just in front of the Grand National and just a little bit away from FY4. I can see that going. It's got a haunted swing ride at the end that is pretty iconic for the park, but it doesn't work properly. It doesn't go all the way over anymore. Is there much point in spending the money refurbishing it? I don't think so. And, you know, for me, I think, you know, Impossible is a pretty big building that could come out and potentially make way for a new ride if it was to go on that site where the fountains are and all around FY4 there. It could even extend down that way. In terms of potential coaster sites, Pleasure Beach is a very compact site with not much space. So if they were going to open a new coaster at some point, I think it would go around that area, to be honest. Right, Wild Mouse, Trauma Towers, Impossible, FY4, around that sort of site, you could fit something on there. And I've got an idea for them coming up in my wish list shortly. Now, something that I can also see is the refurbishment of some of the wooden roller coasters at the park. I'm sure you knew this was going to be coming. And when I say refurbishment, I'm talking about a general retrack or a full retrack, possibly new trains from another manufacturer going on to the Grand National and also the Big Dipper. Now, these are both fantastic rides. The Grand National is certainly pretty rough these days, especially if you're towards the back. It would definitely benefit from a retrack, and I do think at some point they're going to have to. Like, you know, they've already got a sign out the front about, you know, don't go on it, basically, you know, unless you want to be bashed about, if you've got any like spinal conditions and that sort of thing. You know, it's only a matter of time. Like, with the way the world's going, it's a matter of time until that ride has to have something done to it. It'll either close or something has to be done to it. And I think they will do a full retrack or a majority retrack of that ride. The lift hill, the whole thing just needs a complete refurbishment, in my opinion. It's an old ride. It was built in 1935, but yeah, you know, it just really needs something doing to it. And I think a full retrack is something what they might look at in the future. Along with that, another wooden roller coaster that's about to reach 100 years old in 2023, so that's only a couple of years away, is of course the iconic Big Dipper. Love the Big Dipper, but again, it could do with a retrack and a complete repaint. I'd love to see them modernise it in terms of, you know, I'm not talking about changing it into an RMC. You know, that might come in my wish list, but no, in seriousness, you know, I think they could do a full retrack of the Big Dipper, and also maybe paint it up to be a modern colour scheme to kind of fit with Icon that's just the other side of it. You know, I can see that happen at some point in the future. Yeah, along with that as well, one that I'm going to put out there that I think might happen in the next few years is a Nickelodeon Land retheme. Now, Nickelodeon Land is actually turning 10 years old. It opened back in 2011. Now, you've got to think, with it being an IP, you know, the Pleasure Beach are paying for a license to actually keep that. How popular is Nickelodeon, especially here in the UK? You know, it's one to think about, isn't it? So potentially, I could see Nickelodeon Land being rethemed within the next few years. Normally, these theme parks run things on a contract that's either 5 years, 10 years or 15 years. So it'd be really interesting to see. I mean, I don't know, but how long is the license on Nickelodeon Land? Because I could see that area changing. I don't think we'd see the rides particularly be removed or changed. They'd just be either repainted, rethemed, whether that be another IP that Pleasure Beach decide to bring in, or if they decide to just rename the attractions something else. But I can see that happening in the next, we could be talking 5 years from now, but I do think that's on the cards in the short-term future, a possible retheme of Nickelodeon Land. It'd be, I can just see it happening at some point. I imagine the licensing fees are pretty expensive for that as well. So there we go. They're my predictions on what I think is likely to happen. Like I say, I've got no insider knowledge. This is just from my experience of the park. Go in there thinking what's realistic. I'm keeping this series realistic. I don't like to go too over the top with things, but I am going to share with you now my wish list, and there's certainly some things to get talking about and thinking about with this one. So here we go. So I'm going to put it straight out there. I was speaking earlier about the FY4 area and how I would put something on there. If the funds allowed it, I would have a Gerstlauer bobsled coaster. Now, this is something a bit like Tiki Waka, what they've got at Wallaby Belgium. Here in the UK, we've actually got one, that's Cobra at Paultons Park. Something like that, a family Gerstlauer bobsled coaster with a spooky theme. And when I say spooky, I'm not talking like full-on horror, like Saw the Ride or anything, just a spooky theme to fit with the Ghost Train. Now, the Ghost Train is a Pleasure Beach classic. Can you imagine them turning that whole sort of street, what they've got, where the Ghost Train is, into like a spooky town, a spooky village, and then having the station for this Gerstlauer bobsleigh coaster, kind of where Wild Mouse was, the lift hill sort of coming across to where Trauma Towers was, and then it's sort of going back over, doing some turnaround sections and drops over where Impossible is, over the top of the FY4 buildings, or something that I would maybe change there too, I'll talk about in a moment, and then back over to the Wild Mouse. So kind of like, imagine it being a big square layout, but more exciting than that. Obviously there'd be drops, turnarounds in different parts. And then they could also change the Spectacular Dancing Water show to have it as like a spooky fountain show and some heavy theming around it, little indoor sections like trapdoors, a bit like the Ghost Train looks, but I have it as a spooky roller coaster. Great family investment. I think that is the way forward for Pleasure Beach. Family coaster would be fantastic. Now, I'll move on to the next thing, and that is a brand new entrance that I'd like to see. At the moment, the ticket centre is inside the bottom of the casino building, which is a very iconic building at Pleasure Beach. They can't change that too much because of its listed status, but they can remove things and change the ticket entrance. It never used to be in there. So they could take that out. And what I'm imagining is, opposite Passage del Terra, you've got the arcade there that stretches all the way down. You've also got the Impossible building, and that's kind of a big section along the front. What I would do is a big modern entrance to Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I'm talking glass panel windows, state-of-the-art LED lighting, chandeliers. I'm sure Amanda Thompson would love that. Like really modern entrance, big Blackpool Pleasure Beach light up sign on the top along the promenade. And yeah, it could be amazing. You've got to think, with everything that's happened with the pandemic over the past year, a lot of ticket sales have been done online. And I do think the future for these parks is going to be a lot more online ticket sales. I can see that happening. So with Blackpool Pleasure Beach, do they really need that big desk full of all tills? As much as it's sad to see, because they wouldn't need as many staff to operate it, I do think, unfortunately, at some point in the future, a lot of ticketing is going to go online and via apps and QR codes. So I could love to see a brand new entrance to sort of reflect that along the front of the promenade. And then you actually walk straight into the park, and the first thing you'd see in front of you is the fountain show. So you come through a new entrance and you've got the fountain show, and of course there as well, this new family coaster that sort of spreads around it. That could also interact with the entrance, do a bit of a gatekeeper at Cedar Point, how it interacts with the entrance. You can have a couple of little bunny hills over the entrance building. So that could look really cool. And of course that would also free up another one of the classic rides that has been closed for many years now, but is still there in terms of the building for it, and that is Noah's Ark. So normally now you buy your tickets at the ticket centre, then you enter through the turnstiles and security area under Noah's Ark. Now, of course, if they had a new entrance, you wouldn't need to use Noah's Ark for that. So you know what I'd do? I will build a Blackpool Pleasure Beach museum celebrating the history of the park. Now, it might not attract thousands and thousands of visitors to the park doing this, but Blackpool Pleasure Beach is one of the most special theme parks in the world. It's got so much history, so much heritage. It should be on display in a wonderful museum, and that for me should be on the lower level of Noah's Ark. If they could do, maybe try and extend it upstairs, upstairs, you know, into the actual Noah's Ark building possibly, but I don't know if that would be possible. I really don't. From health and safety point of view, probably not. But just using the bottom layer of the Noah's Ark building where the current area is for the tickets and for the turnstiles and the security area, I think would be fantastic. So yeah, I'd love to see a museum in there at some point. Now, this is one that I'm going to say that might be a little bit controversial. I've already spoke actually about this wooden coaster, which is the Grand National, earlier on. What I think they might do, the realistic option is they're going to keep replacing bits of track or do a full overhaul and retrack it. What I would do is contact a manufacturer called Rocky Mountain Construction, and I would see what could be done in terms of the Grand National. Now, you've got to be realistic. This is a really old wooden roller coaster. Like I say, it was built in 1935. What could be done? You've got to think of the foundations, how old this ride is, the space to transform this into an RMC. But I do think it could be done. When I was at IAPA a couple of years ago, I actually had a bit of a conversation with one of the team from RMC, just talking about all the wooden coasters. And I actually mentioned the Grand National just to see, you know, what they thought to it. And their words were, it could be done. So you never know. If the money was there and the Pleasure Beach wanted to, it could be done. But you know, it's one of them things. Yes, it's history, but you've got to think of these theme parks aren't designed to be full-on museums. Now, as much as I'd love to see a history museum at the park, the full park isn't a museum. It's a tourist attraction. It's got to get new people in. History is really important for a park. However, the Grand National is getting to the point where, you know, it's unbearable. So, you know, if RMC could come in and do something, it would be great. I'm not saying it would 100% be possible. It's a very compact site. Foundations, support, structural issues, you don't know. But it would be great. If that wasn't an issue, then I'd love to see an RMC. If not, maybe a complete GCI, Great Coast International retrack of it, completely reprofiling it to make it better, a better ride. As long as they don't start banking all the corners though, because we want to keep them lateral G-forces, don't we? Moving on then to the final thing that I'm going to talk about on my wish list, and that is the Space Invader 2 building. There used to be an indoor coaster there, right next to Nickelodeon Land and above the pizza restaurant. And what they've got is quite a big space. Now, what they could do in there, I'd like to see, is a new dark ride. I know it wouldn't be huge, but they could maybe do something multi-level dark ride in there, which would be fantastic. Maybe sort of a modern Omnimover style ride that can, you know, go up a corner on a slant to take you to a second level. There's enough space in there for something like that. So I'd love to see it. I remember, you know, back when Nickelodeon Land opened, there was rumours of like a phase 2 going in there, whether it be like a 4D cinema was spoke about, maybe a couple of indoor rides. So yeah, it's still empty. I'd love to see them do something like that there in the future. So there we go. That is it. So they're my predictions and wish list for Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Do you like any of my ideas? What are your thoughts? Let me know down below in the video comments. And what would you do at Blackpool Pleasure Beach if you were in charge as well? And also, what are your realistic predictions? Like I say, I did this in the Alton Towers one. I like to keep it realistic, you know, and putting it out there. And let's see what happens. There is something to look forward to in the future of Pleasure Beach though, and that is of course the big refurbishment of Valhalla that is continuing throughout this year, but it should be, fingers crossed, reopening in 2022. Thanks for joining me, Sean Sandbrook. I'll be back next week with another video in our Future of series. Which theme park is it going to be? It's going to be the Future of Thorpe Park, so I'm looking forward to that one. Thanks for watching, and that leaves me with one final thing to say. Get out there and keep on riding. See you soon.